Right, good morning, welcome back to the channel. A grey old day today, and a little bit of a different one. I'm going to run through all the motorcycles that I've owned that has led to this, the little CL500. There's quite a few to get through, so this might be just part one of a series actually, but let's get down the road and I'll tell you the first bike I ever owned. See you in a minute. Yes, welcome back again. Thanks for joining me as always. I do appreciate it. Off the Pool Hall Cafe today, so haven't got far, but I'm going to run through all the bikes that I've owned. Now, where did it all start for me? Well, I've got to go a long way back to roughly 1975. I was 15 years old, and I was at school, obviously. And you know what it's like at school, there's always a kid that's in your year that is the oldest, so becomes 16 before everybody else, and that lad was called Andy Weaver. I'll mention his name because I know he's actually passed away now, sadly, but Andy Weaver turned up one day on a Fantic Caballero sports moped. Yes. And looking at that bike was a thing that hooked me onto motorcycles. Previous to that, I was very much a car kid. I was into cars, my dad was into cars, not into bikes at all. And I had no real knowledge or understanding of bikes, but the minute I saw this incredible looking bike, and for the time it was, trust me, amazing, I was hooked. The other bikes, obviously around at the time, were the other sports mopeds. The famous Fizzy, the FS1E Yamaha. But that looked like a moped, if you know what I mean, whereas this Fantic looked like a proper motorbike, and I was hooked. So that was it. I decided I wanted a motorcycle, and I talked my dad into helping me buy one. And the bike I chose, and my very first bike, number one, ended up being a Suzuki AP50. So I didn't go down the Fizzy route. The other option was would have been a Honda SS50, the 4-stroke at the time, but that was apparently slower. So obviously nobody wanted those. We were all just wanting the fastest one you could get. And the major argument was the Fizzy faster than the AP? But hey, which colour was the fastest as well? Well, I had a Maui blue AP50, and that was my first bike. And as we know, the first of anything is a bit special, isn't it? And it really was an absolute game changer for me. I remember I think I had it delivered. I must have had it delivered down to the cottage where I used to live, and I had no idea how to ride a bike, and I literally mean none whatsoever. So I jumped on and fell off within about 100 yards. First time I turned, I didn't realise that it wasn't like a push bike. You couldn't just turn it around on a sixpence, and I fell straight off. So that was a good start. But I soon got used to it. I mean, you learn quickly when you're that age, don't you? And wow, what a fantastic year I had on that bike. Just to explain to people who are not from the UK, at 16 in those days you could have a moped, and that law brought about the existence of sports mopeds, which were basically little motorbikes that also had pedals, usable pedals, and that allowed them to be called a moped and got them through that rule. So fundamentally it was a little motorbike, a geared motorcycle, but 16-year-olds were allowed to ride them. So the AP50, right, number two. Well, a year went past, and as soon as I was 17, I immediately wanted the biggest bike I could own, obviously, which at the time, as long as you had L plates on, was a 250. So my dream bikes, the ones that I had on posters on my wall, there were two of them, and that was a GT750, which was my absolute dream bike, unobtainable. I was never going to be able to afford that ever. It was just a dream. But there was also the GT250 Suzuki, and at that time it was the B model was out, GT250B, which are the black side panels. So that's what I had, and I had one of those in red. Fantastic bike. The other choices at the time, there was three really. It was the RD250 if you're a Yamaha guy, and there was the Kawasaki, the KH250, which was, to be honest, the prettiest of them, with a fantastic twin exhaust on the one side. Looked absolutely marvellous. But I had the 250. I was a Suzuki man by then, so that was my second bike. So as soon as I turned, I had that bike for quite a long time. I'd got myself a job by then, so I could help afford to pay for it. And immediately, within weeks, I think, I applied for my test and took my test, and I passed it. So then that was it. I could ride any motorcycle. I could tear off my L plates, and I could ride any motorcycle. And what happened? I didn't keep the 250 as long as I'd expected, and the reason for that was I was riding along one day. Oh, a bit dodgy there, isn't it? I was riding along one day, coming home from my girlfriend's, and suddenly the GT250 felt weird. It slowed down, and I basically stopped. I thought, what have I... and then it clicked. I knew what I'd done. I'd only left the two-stroke oil out of the tank. I'd forgotten to fill and allowed it to run out as two-stroke oil. Now, as you know, with two strokes, that can be catastrophic. Luckily, I caught it very early and stopped, and I had to push it to the nearest garage and then top up my tank. I furtively tried to start the bike again, worrying what horrendous damage I'd done. But it started fine and ran okay. I don't think it was really damaged, but I don't know if you're like this, but I always then afterwards felt that I heard a rattle, that it was a little bit rattly. So as I'd got a job by then, I decided, well, I can ride any bike now anyway, I'm going to change it. So I talked my dad into helping me out, and paid him asked him to lend me a little bit of money which I could pay back over the following months. And I swapped the 250 for what was the closest to my absolute dream bike, the GT750, and that was the 380, the Suzuki GT380. Now this looked very, very similar to the 750, but obviously a smaller version. There was also a 550 in the range, but the 350 was just about obtainable, and so I had one of those, and that was in Maui Blue. I remember it was called Maui Blue, the same colour actually as my AP50, the first bike I owned. So here I was now, I was just over 17. I think I've got all these numbers right. It's a long time ago. I was just 17, passed my test, no L plates, and I had a GT380, and my motorcycling, had stepped up another notch. And then catastrophe happened, and I mean catastrophe. I'd had a few minor offs, particularly on my sports moped in the past, but I was on the 380 one morning. I was going to work, it was a Saturday morning, and that's when I had my accident. I've probably mentioned it in the past, and you may realise I had a very serious accident. And I was driving through the town of Starport on 7, which is a town I've showed you before on videos, and a lorry pulled out from the side road straight in front of me. As I've mentioned before, I'm still nervous about that to this day. And I was 17, about 17 and a half, not quite 18 years old, and the lorry pulled out in front of me. It was the winter time, it was in January, and I hit it. I ran straight into it. I couldn't, it was so sudden what happened. could barely even get to the brakes. But it turns out, witnesses told me this afterwards, because ironically my boss at work was only 3 cars behind and watched the whole thing happen. I'd just overtaken him actually before the accident, pulled back into the line of traffic, and he said that I dropped the bike to the right hand side, probably knowing that the impact was just inevitable. And let me just do this junction, there we go. And what happened was the bike hit the lorry, the 2 wheels slid up the road, or basically hit the lorry at the same time almost, the 2 wheels, and the bike came up between my legs, if you can imagine that. I won't go too much graphic detail, but I had a shattered pelvis, and I was in agony. I then passed out on the road, ambulances and all the rest of it. And to cut a long story short, I was told by the surgeon a few weeks later, after I was lying in bed in traction, I was told by the surgeon that I probably wouldn't walk again, which is a bit of a shocking thing to be told when you're barely not even 18 years old. I was quite sporty, played football and used to run a lot, so obviously it was an awful lot to deal with, to be told you probably won't walk again. But obviously I did eventually recovered about 2 years later. But as far as bikes are concerned, that ended, as you can imagine, my motorcycling for a period of time. I was terrified to get back on. So my next bike, some years later, probably about 7 or 8 years later, was an off-road machine, and the reason I bought that was because I was too frightened to go on the road, to be honest, but I was still had that addiction for motorcycles. So I bought a Yamaha, so the next one, a Yamaha GT175. Now I never road registered it, didn't insure it, I just had it down at my dad's property and tried to do a bit of off-road riding, and believe me, that didn't last long, because I don't know if you've ever tried off-road, but it's a lot harder than it seems, and I was put off pretty quickly because I came off a few times, as you do as you're practicing off-road, and with my injuries that I still had, it was a little bit risky to be tumbling around in fields and falling off my motorbike, so that didn't last too long. So somewhere along the line I sold that. I can't remember how or when or who to. But the next bike that came along, I think we're up to 5 now, aren't we? I bought with the idea that I was just going to have it as a project, and clean it and polish it, not actually ride it on the road. Yeah. Well, because you can imagine that didn't last long. And that was a Honda 404, beautiful bike with those amazing exhausts. And but I did end up road registering it, but not using it very often. But the Honda 404, fantastic bike, and I had that for a while, and then sold that. I'm not sure exactly again when, how, or who to. But that was my my next bike. Right, here we are. We're at Pool Hall. I haven't got through very many bikes so far. I expect I'm going to make this part 1, and then I'll move on to a part 2 and maybe a part 3 even of this little run through all the bikes I own. Well, the lads are here. Unfortunately, I've got nowhere to park there, have I? That 4x4's taken up the space, so I'm going to go over here. So, many thanks for being with me. Do appreciate it. I think I'll turn it around. We're here at Pool Hall. You can see there the view from the seats. That's where you sit over there, obviously, all the picnic benches. And that's one of the pools. Lovely place to come and sit this. So that's part 1. Thanks for listening to me, and I will be back with part 2 very shortly. See you later on. Bye for now.